Welcome to this special edition of the Third Dimension. Ali Abdullah Saleh spent almost 33 years on top in Yemen, surviving assassination attempts, 6 wars with the Houthis, and an uprising of the so-called Arab Spring. He spent his decades in power navigating rebellions from every angle, but was widely seen as the only man capable of maintaining a precarious balance of power. Saleh came to power in 1978 after 2 predecessors were assassinated. He became president of United Yemen in 1990 and 4 years later managed to put down a new secessionist movement in the south. President Saleh was an unusual politician and a skilled player in Yemen's political arena. He was known for his shrewd understanding of how to gain tribal alliances, as well as managing to rally support of neighboring countries and major international powers. He was particularly pragmatic, always negotiating with his greatest enemies and turning them into allies. However, his last-minute turn against the Houthis proved to be a volte-face too far. To discuss this topic joins me from the United Kingdom Dr. Elizabeth Kindal. Dr. Kindal is the mistress of Girton College and senior Yemen and Middle East analyst. Dr. Kindal, good to have you again in my show.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay. If we begin by recalling December the 4th, 2017, as a senior Yemen analyst, okay, how did you receive the news of the killing of the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh?
Well, I remember that day really well, December the 4th, 2017. It was a cold winter morning. I was in London. In fact, I was meeting with some Yemenis that morning to discuss some of the projects that we were thinking about implementing in the east of Yemen. And I had an alert on my phone, and then I had 3 alerts, 5 alerts, 10 alerts were bouncing in saying, it looks like Ali Abdullah Saleh has been killed. And this was quite a shock. I remember seeing the photos that were circulating and thinking, is this fake news? It was such a shock to see Saleh looking so miserable, so weak, wrapped in a blanket, assassinated, that it was hard to believe it was true. And then, of course, I started getting calls from Al Jazeera, from the BBC, and so on. So I knew that this day was going to be a very busy day and that there'd be a lot of questions to answer.
So you're suggesting you did not expect it, Dr. Kindal?
I'm not sure that we expected it. Of course, there's been a risk of Ali Abdullah Saleh being assassinated for more than 3 decades. So, you know, he always seemed to have cheated death before. I guess this was one betrayal too far. So I wouldn't say it wasn't expected, and yet there's always something surprising when you see a strong man dead. A bit like when we saw Gaddafi, if someone, or Saddam Hussein, you know, when you see someone who's been a dictator so powerful and you see their dead body, it's always a shock.
Okay, so you refer to the unique survival of Ali Abdullah Saleh, okay, and we know that he rose up to power in 1978, Dr. Kindal, and a senior Yemen analyst, Helen Lakna, she said, we expected to wake up and find that Saleh had been assassinated, okay? Now, my question is, would you elaborate on this, we call it unique survival of Ali Abdullah Saleh for 33 years?
Well, Saleh, yes, he was extraordinary at playing people off against each other. playing factions off against each other, playing political opponents off against each other, playing tribes off against each other, and even playing whole states off against each other. He was a professional survivor. And I guess he puts it right himself when he said what he was doing was dancing on the heads of snakes. That is what he was doing. He would balance the different sources of support so that none would become too powerful and topple him. And he would surround himself by allies. What he did was he built his own power base and was really careful not to allow rivals to come to the fore. There was no question of building institutions, except in the most superficial way. And if you coupled that political sagaciousness, that political efficiency, with a very transactional streak and a ruthlessness, then that, I think, explains how he managed to remain in power in such a difficult and challenging climate for so long.
Yeah. Okay, you refer to the issue of superficial institutions, Dr. Kandal, and you have been to Yemen for many times, and you know Yemenis. Yemen is deeply a societal community. The question is, Dr. Kandal, don't you think that Ali Saleh, in his own way, tried to find that emerging democracy model, okay, within a tribal community, which is quite hard?
I would not call it an emerging democracy model. I would call it a model of understanding the balance of power and understanding the role that needed to be played and needs to be played by tribes. Perhaps there's an element of indirect democracy about it in terms of addressing yourself to the leader of different factions and groups. But this is by no means a bottom-up democracy. This is not how he operated. But what he was a very wise, perhaps I would say cunning more than wise, and a cynical leader, and someone who well understood what other people were seeking and was able to play to that.
Yeah.
So no questions over his political prowess, but perhaps some questions over his commitment to democracy. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and this is also a part of the political game, Dr. Kandal. In the end of the day, a politician should act so.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And you know, in terms of what he achieved, he was the first person to rule over a united Yemen.
Yes.
And that was no easy task because, of course, Yemen had been piecemeal. It was a collection historically of sheikdoms, sultanates, and imamate, tribal factions. It was many different pieces. So to find a way of getting them all to function together, however imperfectly, was quite an achievement.
Yeah, okay. Let me bring here another senior Yemen analyst commenting on Saleh's departure. And here I have got April Longley Alley. She commented on Saleh's death saying, like him or hate him, okay? Saleh's death in this way is more than likely going to bring more pain for Yemen. The question is, Dr. Kandal, looking at the current state of affairs in Yemen today, okay, to what extent you think that pain is spread in the country?
This is a huge question. I think that the pain in Yemen is not getting any better. I don't think that Saleh's death helped particularly, but we're just seeing all of the same drivers of conflict persist. The underlying causes of conflict are still there. It's a question, how do you divide power, territory, and resources? And there's no sign of any of that being solved. I think that Saleh's death did, however, remove a very seasoned political figure who knew how to play all sides from the political scene. And in that sense, one might consider it a loss. So, yeah, I guess it's, in some ways you're losing something, and in other ways you're gaining something. Meanwhile, the actual people of Yemen, those who live there, those who have to survive day to day, are still in a terrible situation.
Okay. Now, Dr. Kandal, as you think broadly about the history of Yemen, and you have referred to it, okay, in your opinion, what positive and negative lessons we should take from Ali Saleh's rule?
But thinking of very specific lessons, I guess it's something about Saleh's strongman tactics gave the impression of stability. And that impression of stability was seductive for superpowers like America, but it was only ever going to be temporary. What we learned from Saleh is that there was a need to build institutions. There was a need to introduce some kind of meritocratic, technocratic style of government, because if you don't do that, then you're only ever going to have wars, conflicts, and power struggles between factions. On the positive side, I think what we can learn from Saleh is that pragmatism can win over ideology. Saleh was a great example of being pragmatic more than ideological in order to achieve political ends. And whether or not you agree with his political ends is another question, but he does show that it's possible. And another thing that he showed, and his rule showed, is that Yemenis are extremely resilient. They have been through enormous challenges, ups and downs, and wars, numerous wars, power struggles between north, between south, between east, between west, between, to some extent, Sunnis and Shiites and different tribal factions, and yet they survive. So yeah, that's at least something to grasp hold of.
Okay. So if we could wrap up this conversation, Dr. Kandal, okay, now in the current state of play in Yemen, do you see any cause now, okay, for tentative optimism about whether the conflict can be resolved and the country can move back to a more peaceful and stable situation?
It's hard to be optimistic, but there are always glimmers of hope, and we have to latch onto those. Right now, the glimmer of hope is that the Houthis have signaled that they're going to end their hostilities in the Red Sea. And that is a window of opportunity to try to bolster all sides of this conflict, including the Presidential Leadership Council, to seize an opportunity to get back to a negotiating table. On the other hand, the causes of the conflict are still there. And there is no sign that the Houthis are dialing down. The danger is that now that the Houthis say that they're leaving the Red Sea alone, does that mean that they're turning their attention to more immediate domestic threats, or indeed to their neighbors, Saudi Arabia? They're making threatening signals. We know that every time they've tried to hold Saudi Arabia to ransom, it has tended to pay off. And they're lashing out against aid workers, against international organizations. So unless there's a viable alternative to the Houthis, and right now the Presidential Leadership Council looks very weak and very split, then I think it's going to be hard. So yes, there's a glimmer of hope. Yes, there's everything still to play for, but I am not optimistic about how easy that's going to be.
Okay. A final thought, if you may, Dr. Kandal. Okay, you referred to Ali Abdullah Saleh as a strong man. Okay, do you think the current or Yemen now lacks a charismatic leader, a leader who can gather all the parties together in the fight against the Houthis?
I would say that Yemen has plenty of strong men and charismatic leaders and people who will attempt to fight the Houthis. The problem is that they don't appear to be able to be united in that one cause. There's too much self-serving interest that goes above the national interest. The 8-man Presidential Leadership Council appears to be pointing in pretty much 8 different directions. So what's lacking is the will to bring all of these disparate talents and resources together and point them in one direction.
Okay, with this we come to the end of this interview, Dr. Kandal. Thank you so much for your time and insights, and thank you for talking again to Yemen Today TV.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. That's all for this time. See you next week with a new edition of The Third Dimension.